The Grand Prix Attack variation against the Sicilian Defense, which is characterized by the move 2 knight c3 and then 3 pawn to f4, gained notoriety back in the 70s and 80s in the UK, where David Rumens, Mark Hebden and Julian Hodgson used it with immense success to crush opponents on the local circuit. Since then a lot has changed, a lot has developed, and Black's defences have been more finely tuned. That said, for all of you white players out there looking for an exciting anti-Sicilian, an aggressive anti-Sicilian, I would say that the Grand Prix Attack is certainly a good try. And also, even though a very well prepared black player should stand fine in this variation, those black players who perhaps aren't so familiar with the themes can still be victim to a very swift crush. And as a result, if you feel like your opponent will not be prepared in this line, I would certainly have it as part of my repertoire of white. Now, the initial concept of the Grand Prix Attack from the white perspective is to gain space on the king side with this move pawn to f2, f4, and use this central pawn duo as a battering ram against the black position. So normally after knight c3, let's say black plays the standard move knight c6, white then plays the move pawn to f4. I will, however, discuss in the following clip the fact that knight c6 isn't black's only move. Black has moves such as d6 or e6 at his disposal. Even a6 is a move. So I just want to make that abundantly clear in this clip, but please check out the following one to see black's second move alternatives. However, the absolute main line of the Grand Prix is with knight c6 and then pawn to f4. Here, black predominantly likes to develop his bishop on the long diagonal, fianchetto, g6 followed by bishop g7. Again, e6 is a possible move, and I will be discussing that once more in the following clip. Staying with g6, black's aim is to develop the bishop on g7 and enhance his control over the d4 square. The d4 square is very much a pivot for black in this position. Often he will want to put a knight on d4, and the knight on d4 controls a lot of the board. So it's important for him to maintain control over this square. Well, after g6, white carries on with his development, knight f3, bishop g7, and we reach a pretty critical position in the whole of the Grand Prix opening. White has a choice. He now needs to develop his bishop some way, and he has two main options. He can either develop the bishop to c4, or he can develop the bishop to b5. Bishop c4 is now considered the slightly more risky, and actually it was considered the main line. Bishop b5 has taken over, and I'll be discussing that in another clip. Sticking with bishop c4 though, white clearly puts his bishop on the most aggressive and active square. The bishop on c4 targets this f7 pawn, and one of the ideas of the Grand Prix Attack is that now that white has played the move f2 to f4, he's looking to open up the f-file as quickly as possible, since when he is castled, he'll then be able to target the f7 pawn with a lot of pressure. So after bishop c4, black usually plays the move pawn to e6, and this is not only the most logical move in the position, but it's the most effective, most accurate. A move like knight f6 here would be a mistake, because that runs into a very quick e5, and well, the knight has got no real decent squares to go to. d6 is another move as well, but this will transpose a lot of the time to the two d6 lines that I'll be covering in the following clip. Sticking with e6 then, black blunts this bishop's range along this diagonal and also prepares in a very short-term future to play the move pawn to d5. And this will not only challenge us in the centre, but will make white move his bishop on c4, have to make a decision about where to put the bishop on c4. So e6 in this position, and now we reach another branch of this bishop c4 variation where white has two moves. He can play the more risky move, which is the move pawn to f5, or he can play the more calm move castles. Let's discuss the move f5 first. f5 is a pawn sacrifice, as you can see straight away. Black can take this pawn. However, practice has shown that taking the pawn offers white fantastic compensation and attacking chances, and as a result has dwindled somewhat in popularity. Let's have a look at some of the lines to demonstrate this. If after f5 black plays the move g takes f5, instead of recapturing straight away, which would of course totally give up control in the centre and allow black to play d5 with a good game, white's idea is that he simply protects this pawn on e4. And what he will do is, let's say black plays a standard move like knight g7, getting his pieces out. White's idea is simply to castle, and his claim is that given that you've now played g takes f5, this has really opened up the black king position. So now that if black castles, immediately this g line is open, and it's arguable that for the pawn, such exposure of the king is simply not worthwhile. Another way white tends to proceed here is to play the move queen e1 to g3, putting a question to this bishop. And black can find himself in a lot of trouble quite quickly in the lines with g takes f5. Another way white has played here is to play with the move in certain positions, perhaps not straight away, knight g5, followed by queen h5, but not in this specific position, because knight g5 would be met by pawn to h6. However, a very risky way for black to play to open up his king side as much as that. That said, e takes f5 is hardly better, in my opinion, and when black plays e takes f5, of course, this cedes control of the very important d5 square, and we'll see how that can become critical for black, because after e5, white continues in the same way with d3. Black develops a knight. White can castle, black can castle, okay. Black's king isn't as exposed now, but after the queen e1 motif and queen h4, we reach a position where control of the d5 square would be a lot more desirable for black, because white's plan is to play bishop g5 followed by knight d5, and suddenly all of his pieces are working together. This knight on e7 is pinned. That will be really difficult to defend. The f6 square is very vulnerable and open to a knight f6 check, and so on. So white has got absolutely fantastic compensation in this position, and from a practical point of view, this is very difficult to defend for black indeed. As a result, after f5, black players have tended to play the move knight e7, ignoring the pawn offering and just getting on with development and threatening to break out with the move d5. And in this position, white has a couple of moves. He can take this pawn on e6. Black can take black. Also d takes e6 is fine here for black. But f takes e6, d3, and now d5. This is the main line that black plays in this position. White almost always retreats the bishop back to b3. It makes no sense, of course, exchanging in the centre here, because that just allows another bishop to come out. But after bishop e3, it was found that after b5, this is an excellent move for black, and white is already in a difficult position. The move b5, of course, threatens c4, which would win the white bishop. But after knight takes b5, queen a5 check, this wins a piece, because after knight c3, black can pin the knight with d4. As a result, white has to go in for a very murky line with castles. c4, pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, and after king takes d8, well, again, this is at least fine for black. In my opinion, all of you white players out there should avoid this variation with white. So, the f5 move immediately in this position has gone out of fashion somewhat, and the more conservative way to play is with the move castles. So white gets on with development. And after knight g7, again, not f5 in this position, but the move d3. And here is where, in my experience, a lot of black players have gone astray. They've been far too complacent with their position and development. White's plan is really simple. White intends to play queen e1, queen h4, pawn to f5, and with the king castled on, of course, the king on g8 after it's castled, to set up this configuration with the bishop on h6 and the knight on g5 with the queen on h4. And this is a really dangerous setup for black to face. So if he plays nonchalantly, and I'll give a variation right now. So let's say, for example, black castles here, queen e1, and plays a move like a6. Looks like a very normal move. Well, white can play queen h4, b5, bishop b3, and let's say, for example, he plays the move bishop b7. Well, now f5 is a really serious move for black to contend with, because even if he takes this pawn off, which is hardly desirable anyway because it would weaken so much of his structure, let's say he plays e takes f5, after bishop h6 there is really no decent way for black to stop this knight g5 move. It's thanks to the pin against the king with the bishop. So let's say, for example, he played knight a5. Well, knight g5, and white delivers mate pretty quickly here. It's almost impossible to stop, except losing or willing to lose a lot of material. So white's plan is quite simple, to take the bishop on g7 and then crash through on h7. And this setup with bishop h6, knight g5 and the queen on h4 is one of the setups which has cost black so many defeats in this variation. As a result, after castles, black can castle, white can play queen e1, but here black has to be a lot more proactive, a lot more to the point, and d5 is by far the best way for black to do that, in my experience. White always retreats, but it's here that black plays the move knight to d4, and suddenly he's looking to not only win this b3 bishop, which is a very useful piece for white in the attack, especially when it pins against the black king. But also the knight on d4 allows this other knight on e7 to come round to c6, meaning that any queen h4 ideas suddenly becomes a lot more difficult. On top of this, the knight on d4 challenges the knight on f3, and the knight on f3, as we've just seen, is a very useful piece in a lot of these Grand Prix attacks. So as a result, this position here, well, practice has shown that black should be fine, and I would recommend that you check out some of the games that will be available on Chess24 and perhaps some of the more comprehensive series to understand why this is the case indeed. So that is the main line of the Grand Prix attack covered extremely briefly, and that's the bishop c4 main line. What we're now going to take a look at is the new main line with the move bishop b5 on move 5 instead of the move bishop c4.
Hi, this is Grandmaster Damian Lemos. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.